I was hit in my elbow and my arm just about fell off. And I picked up a grenade that was in my right hand and I threw it. And I picked up my gun with my left hand and I started charging. The chaplain came by and he says, "God loves you." I said, "I'm certain he loves me." But I'm not ready to see him yet. My side was patched up, my leg was patched up, and then they began rehab. One lesson, make certain that your loved one sleeps on your bad side. If you had scars on this side, you would want your wife on this side. That's human nature. And the instructor says, if you have your loved one on your good side and you put your arm around her, you better have educated toes. I met a young lady, and here I am coming back from the war. My mother looked at me. She says, "What happened?" I said, "Well, I proposed." She said, "Oh, no." What did she say? She said, "Yes, she'd love to." Boom, she fainted. We went to see the president. A telephone call came in. "Dan, the president wants to speak with you." So, "I hear your father's in town." I said, "Yes, sir." "Why don't you bring him around?" I took my father there, and my father is in absolute awe. The press corps, they're always waiting outside the White House. All the cameras are there. "Senator, can you tell us anything about your meeting with the president?" I says, "No, this was my father's meeting, not mine." My father looked at the camera. He says, "I've just seen the president of the United States. I've seen my son become a United States senator. I can die now." I always say nothing is impossible. It is possible.
Greater Good Radio. Connect, learn, heal, and grow. This Greater Good archive video is brought to you by Brain Gain Hawaii, a boutique executive recruiting, career development, and coaching firm. Learn more at braingainhi.com.
Welcome to our show, Senator. Thank you for being here today.
It's good to be here.
So congratulations, because you've served Hawaii as senator for a little over 40 years, 44 years now. How do you feel about that?
I've been in since 1963, but I was in the House before then, from '59 when Hawaii became a state. And before then, I was in the territorial legislature. That's before you folks were born.
You know, you've been in politics for so long. What is it that keeps you going, doing this type of work?
Well, I must say I love my work. I love the challenges, and they're almost daily, so there's no dull moment in my life. I would think that people who make money live a dull life. They have to spend a lot of money to make their lives exciting. But in my case, every day is an exciting day. I mean that.
What made you interested in being involved in politics?
Well, when I was 17, Pearl Harbor was attacked. And I soon found out that I was an enemy alien because of a decree of the government. And my parents were Japanese. And then, as a result, I could not put on the uniform of this land. Then finally, in early '43, they opened the doors and we volunteered. And I served in the military as an 18-year-old private, became a sergeant, then a lieutenant and a captain, and wounded 4 times. And when I got out of the service, I felt that I should do something to help people. Now, this sounds high and mighty, but I meant that. After spending time in the military and watching my friends die and get wounded, I couldn't see ourselves going back to the plantation mode of life. And so, though I had planned to become a doctor, that was out of the question, so I decided to go to law school and become a politician, to the chagrin of my folks, you know, because politicians were not highly regarded at that time. And in some quarters, they're still not highly regarded. But I went to law school, and after I got out, I became an assistant prosecutor for 1 year. Then I tried running for office, and I was successful.
When you first got back from the war, was it something that happened during that experience that made you clear about your path to politics and public service?
After serving in the military, and when you realize that government made a lot of decisions, one of the greatest decisions is to go to war and have your sons and daughters killed. But there are other decisions that are made by government that affect all of our lives. Education for one, health conditions, environment, etc. And I felt that as a citizen of the United States, I did my part and I should do my part again.
So before deciding that you were going to enlist and then eventually decide that you're going to be a politician, when you were a young boy, was your path towards being a doctor?
Well, I was the eldest son in the family, and in my generation that made a difference. My father was the eldest, my grandfather was the eldest. In fact, for 7 generations, I'm the eldest. So my grandparents worked in the fields in Kauai, and my father began his education at the age of 14. And so they looked upon me as their eldest son to do something about the family. And I was brought up in that sense, even from an early age, being told that never dishonor your family. You know, it's rather difficult to tell my son, never dishonor your family, but in my generation, it was a common phrase. Don't dishonor us, don't bring any shame to us. And they were very pleased that I wanted to be a physician because, let's face it, at that time it was advancement in status. School teacher, doctor, lawyer, getting out of the plantation. But then when I was wounded, they were stunned, but I said, I'm going to be a lawyer, but I didn't tell them right off that I wanted to be a politician.
When was it that you felt that your parents thought that being a politician was okay?
I think my parents would have approved anything I wanted to be. They had that much faith, but my mother wanted to be a minister because this is what happened. Before I began my surgical work and rehabilitation work, I had to face a panel of experts to determine my future. And after several consultations and examinations and taking tests, the panel concluded that number 1, I should be a teacher, if not a social worker, 3rd, a minister, or 4th, a politician. And there's one thing in common, you deal with a lot of people. They said I would be very unhappy doing research all by myself in a laboratory. But I would be in my best element if I dealt with a large number of people. So when I told that to my mother, wow, she was enthralled, you know, because my mother has an interesting story on her side. She was an orphan at 4. She spent a little while at Susanna Wesley Home in an orphanage, and she was adopted by the bishop of the church. And so it was Bible reading and hymn singing every night for her. So she wanted me to be a minister.
Did you feel any tension between your religion that you were brought up in, I mean, that your family was?
I was brought up as a Christian, a Methodist. My father was brought up as a Buddhist, but my mother was very strict, and when my father says, may we go to lunch, he says, you want to take me to lunch? You get baptized first. She was a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and they don't get any tougher than that.
What do you think is the most important thing your mom taught you?
My mother was always very generous with me, but she always told me that as the eldest son, you must sacrifice. You must never bring shame to the family, and whatever you do, do your best. And she said, never be unkind. She always said, there's always a tomorrow. I've always applied that.
So being that you mentioned dealing with people, have you always been good with relationships and networking?
I think I'd be bored and unable to do my thing if I had to do it just by myself with a computer or in a laboratory.
So it's very natural for you then, this position.
Oh yes, I love to deal with people.
In your opinion, when you're building relationships like you have done over the past, number of decades, what are the most important things that you've done to build these relationships?
Well, there are certain things that I've learned over the years as a child and as such. One, you very seldom hear me using the word impossible, because I'm convinced that every problem has a solution. If it didn't have a solution, it won't be a problem, because the word impossible is a cop-out. So if you don't want to do something, you say, well, that's impossible. And that's it. No discussions further. The other is dealing with staff. And I've always had staff of some sort. I would never tell my staff, may I have this as soon as possible. Now, if I told you, may I have this as soon as possible, you would just work your tail off, not knowing when I want it. You want to please me, but that would just burn you out. And what if you worked your overnight and got it out to me and I said, oh, I didn't need it as soon as this. Tomorrow would have been fine. That would have been a letdown for you. So I tell you, may I have this by 3 o'clock this afternoon? So you know when I want it. You can pace yourself. And your relationship with your staff improves that way. And it may sound like bragging, but I have the most senior staff in Washington. For some reason, they don't want to leave. And I know, for example, that my assistant here in Hawaii could be getting 3 times what she's receiving in federal pay. But she likes the work. And I can pick out several others on my staff because I've had lawyers come up to me and says, we'd like to hire your assistant, and she says no, or he says no. But if you have good relations like this, you're the beneficiary.
To get your people loyal, what are the most important things that you think you've done over the past number of decades?
The relationship should be honest and be considerate of their sensibilities.
Your life seems to be driven by a purpose that seems greater than your own personal gain. What would you say that purpose has been that's carried you through these last decades?
This sounds impossible, but it's not. I would like to see mankind someday, maybe not in my lifetime, be able to set up procedures, a process to make war unnecessary. It's a sad commentary, but ever since I've been in this business, there's always been a war. After World War II was Korea. After Korea, it was Vietnam. After Vietnam, it was Panama. After Panama, it was Grenada. After Grenada, it was Somalia. It's just on and on. And in all of these, even if most Americans may not be concerned because we have a volunteer army now, volunteer military, and when you consider that less than 1% of the nation's population is in uniform, and I would say less than 85% of the people have some relationship to the military. Now, may I ask you, do you have any brothers in the military?
Mm-mm.
Your parents in the military?
Not now.
Your
before.
cousins?
Your dad served, though.
My father was in the military, like reserves. Not now, though. I don't know if anyone now.
See, the average American has no relationship, so he can't get excited over a war in Panama. They got excited in Vietnam because men were dying and they were being drafted. Now, in this war, even after mission accomplished, people are dying. Most of them died after that. And I was concerned that we were not prepared for a war of this nature. This, in many ways, is a cultural war. For example, I was horrified when the President of the United States, with good intentions, gave a major speech in which he said, this is a crusade. Now, can you imagine in the Middle East being told that this is a crusade? If you know anything about the history of the world, that's a terrible word, especially there. And as I also told, I'm chairman of the committee that appropriates money for defense. And I said, we've got weapons. We have the wherewithal to destroy any nation, really level it out. But we're not skilled at restoring and repairing. And here we're going to go into this war to destroy, but not to repair. And it's not a good attitude.
You know, you mentioned about being a leader of your staff, and also Hawaii looks at you as one of our leaders, and you've also dealt with many leaders being in politics. What are 5 traits that you think a person needs to have to be an effective leader?
Well, my mother, from a very early age, and I'm talking about 2, 3 years old, pounded into me that no one is too good for you, but you're not too good for anyone else. Titles are titles. It's what's inside of you that counts. And after a while, you begin to believe that, and I believe that. So I find it comfortable sitting down with CEOs or sitting down with interviewers or with kings or prime ministers. They have their problems, the emotions. I have my problems and emotions. And as long as I treat them courteously and decently, I would expect that from them. My mother taught me a good lesson. No one's too good for you, and don't be afraid.
Are we able to go back a little bit and talk about 442nd to bring people up to speed that may not be that familiar with it? As you're looking back on that now, how has that affected your life today?
Immensely. Well, first of all, to be a youth of 18, 17 at that time, and be told in your face that you're an enemy alien. My neighbors were good, all very friendly, but to have the government of the United States, the country you love, tell you that you're an enemy alien, you know, that's a blow. Then they tell you you can't serve in the military because you can't be trusted. And so when the regiment was formed, it was a natural thing for the men who volunteered. They did so for one reason, to prove that they were just as good as anyone else, good Americans. And so when we were given assignments, we never complained. And when we got the assignment to rescue the lost battalion, the attitude among many of the men was simple. This is what we wanted. This is our opportunity. Well, in a battle that lasted 4.5 days, 5 days, our casualty rate exceeded 800. Of that number, over 200 dead. Now, compare that to today, 2 dead today or 3 yesterday. We had over 200 in 4 days. But as a result, at least in the military family there, no one said we were not Americans.
Are you comfortable with that, taking us through what it was like?
Oh, no problem. The big day for me is April 21st, because on April 21st, I received my last wound. And the last wound blew my arm off. So that meant that I could never be a surgeon. See, I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. I had it all figured out. But that was out of the question. And I'm going to tell you something that very few people are aware of. In World War II, when the battles were so intense and so large, the casualty rates were in the hundreds, thousands. And these field hospitals really were not able to accommodate them. We had no helicopters. In my case, I was evacuated at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I got to the field hospital at midnight, 9 hours. So when you get to the hospital, you got a whole bunch of people on stretchers. And a crew comes around, a couple of physicians and a couple of attendants, and they'll look at this and say, tent number 1, tent number 1, tent number 2, tent number 3. Do you know what that meant? 1 in that case meant treat them right away. Number 2, take it easy because this one can last a long time. Number 3, forget it. That's on the verge of death. I was in tent number 3. And the chaplain came by and he says, God loves you. I said, I'm certain he loves me, but I'm not ready to see him yet, you know. And he looked at me, he says, you know, I believe you. I said, yes, I've got a whole life ahead of me. So I went to tent number 1.
Did you mean he moved you to tent number 1?
He called in the staff and says, take him to tent number 1. I had 17 transfusions. So the crew did not make a mistake. You know, if they hadn't looked after me for a couple of more hours, I think I would have just faded away.
How were you coherent at the time?
Well, it's part of discipline, because after you've been in combat for about a year, you know that once you sleep, you go into shock, and that's it. So I made certain I was awake. See, my last wound was at noon, but I stayed until 3 to get the men settled down. And I just determined to stay awake. I carried on a stretcher all the way for 9 hours, up and down mountains.
Your men carried you?
Prisoners. I couldn't afford to have my men go because we needed all the men. 1 person to guard me and German prisoners.
Are you able to tell us on that last battle when you're going up the hill, what made you want to charge the hill? I mean, were you scared?
Well, One is discipline because of part of the training. Secondly, I suppose it's macho. You don't want your men to see that you're not up to it. But the main fact is you're temporarily insane. Because when I look back and people describe the men in my platoon, say, you did this and did that and did that, I said, no, it can't be. I'm not that crazy. Now, according to the witnesses, I have vague memories because you're just rushing through, your adrenaline is flowing. I was hit in my elbow and my arm just about fell off. And I picked up a grenade that was in my right hand, clutched, and I threw it. And I picked up my gun with my left hand and I started charging. Oh, that looks like a ghost, right? Now, would you do that if you were sane? You would say, ah, oui.
Yeah, I don't...
Maybe it wasn't just heroics. You just wanted to finish the job, that's all.
So do you think that that type of, I guess it was discipline or attitude even, that's what you've carried with you through your career?
Well, if you're in the military, you'll know, for example, you take your squad out to march, left turn, right turn, all of that. After a while, the men, just listening to your voice, when you say stop, they'll stop. Go, they'll go. And it's part of war is that, discipline.
When you were rehabilitating and recovering in the hospital, is that when you were next to Bob Dole?
Yes, I got very friendly with Bob Dole. He has a bum. Yeah. In fact, I used to kid him. I said, why don't you cut it off? It was useless. But he told me once in a firm voice, I came in with 4 limbs, I'm going out with 4 limbs. He did, even if it's useless, There was another senator there. He was a colonel. His name was Phil Hart. My office is in the Hart building. And so I've had the privilege of knowing 2 senators before they were senators. But an important part of my life was in the hospital. And it's something that you don't see present-day patients go through. Today, for example, it's a matter of funds, I suppose. A patient with my disability would be out of the hospital in about 6 months. Then after that, if he needs treatment, he goes to the VA hospital. In my case, I was in a military hospital for 21 months. My surgical and medical side was resolved, in about 9 months. I received a prosthetic appliance, my side was patched up, my leg was patched up, and then they began rehab. That's interesting. I never drove before I left Hawaii, so I had to take lessons to qualify to drive in every state and every territory. I had to play a couple of sports. I qualified in basketball and swimming. I had to learn how to do carpentry, electrical work, and plumbing, not as an expert, but for example, you may be asking yourself, how would I pound a nail with one hand? In those days and today, you can find spools of thread, wooden spools. There's a hole in the middle. Now you put that over your target, put a nail in there, and bang, pick off the stool and bang, boom, boom. Hey, I'm pretty good at that. Then I had to learn a musical instrument. Saxophone was out of the question. You need 2 hands for that. So they suggested the trumpet. See, all you need are 3 fingers, right? Well, the instructor said, you can read music, because I read music before, but your lips are too soft. My wife would say so too. But he said, why don't you try the piano? I qualified on the piano, playing one-handed. But they also taught you the real rehabilitation. Now, when I got home from the hospital, my mother asked me, after I spent about a week at home, I said, I'm going to Waikiki. She said, oh, you're going shopping. I said, no, I'm going swimming. And she was horrified. The thought that I would expose myself with my injury in the public to swim. Well, in Michigan, where we did swimming, we did so in a public lake. And you get used to it. I just hope today's disabled veteran can do the same thing. They taught us how to dance. They even taught us how to make love.
Oh, yeah?
I'll tell you.
Okay.
One lesson, that's all, one day. And the lesson was, make certain that your loved one sleeps on your bad side. See, it's human nature not to expose your ugliness to your loved one, right? If you had scars on this side, you would want your wife on this side. That's human nature. And the instructor says, if you have your loved one on your good side and you put your arm around her, you better have educated toes. See?
That way we learn everything and at least something new in every interview.
But doesn't that make sense? Now, this is life and death. Rehab, they're going to send you out into a cruel world. If they just sent you out from the hospital, that'd be cruel. You won't know what to do. Now, when I go to a restaurant, and once in a while I'd like to have a steak, it doesn't bother me or embarrass me to ask the waitress, may I have it cut? See, this is all part of the rehab program. Now, when you dance and you have one arm off, what do? Hey? A lot of good things I learned. I wear shoes, but I don't have lace. I can tie a lace, but it takes too long, so I just slip it on. But I can put on this tie, and I think it's better than yours. You don't have a tie.
I would need her to help me tie it anyways. When you were in the hospital, in your book, you mentioned a nurse that was trying to help you with a pack of cigarettes, and that became a learning lesson for you.
Oh,
Can you share that with us?
That was the first nurse. In those days, just about every man smoked. We had free cigarettes. And that's how we became addicted. I never smoked before I got into service. And so I'm in the hospital. I'm now conscious. I wanted a cigarette. So I asked the nurse, may I have a cigarette? She said, just a minute. She went away. She brought a brand new pack, threw it on my chest, and walked away. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, I had to rip it open. I've never opened a pack single-handedly. How do you do it? So the first thing I thought about was just to tear it with my mouth, and I tore up half the cigarettes, but I got it out. And I have it in my lips. The nurse comes by, says, oh, you need a light. Yeah. So she goes back and picks up a book of matches, you know, the folding type, throws it on my chest. You know, I want to curse her. I open it up. What am I supposed to do with this? And I did everything possible. Nothing happened. So she came by and says, oh, good, you quit smoking. Smoking is not good for you. And I had to say, I don't know how to light it. Oh. So she taught me how to light it, one-handed. Then she said, I'm not going to be around here for the rest of your life. You'll have to learn how to light your own matches, cut your own meat, dress yourself, and do everything else. So from now on, you're going to be learning. I fell in love with her.
So when did it become the point where you decided it's not about you anymore and you wanted to give back and help others?
Oh, when I got in the hospital, I figured that I was lucky. See, in the hospital I was in, orthopedic patients, amputees, like Bob Dole. Second, burn cases, oh, they're terrible. No eyelids, no nose, no lips, you know, that type. And the third case, brain injury, just sitting there, not knowing what's happening. I look at them and I say to myself, man, you're lucky. All you did was lose your arm. These people have lost their character, personality, everything else. And the third category, you're going to be a burden on the family for the rest of your life.
And then that's where you decided.
That's when I decided, you know, I'm healthy, I'm lucky, and this country has been good to me. I get a pension for the rest of my life and everything else. I'm going to get free education. Well, the least I can do is to reciprocate. So here I am.
Is that when you had your conversation with Bob Dole about him sharing with you that he was going to go back and be a senator someday?
Well, you see, I asked him, I said, Bob, what are your plans? He says, well, after this, I'll go to law school, and then I'll become a county attorney. You know, making plans like this. And then I'll run for the state legislature, and the first opening in the Congress, I'll be there. And so I thought, well, that's a good idea. So I went to law school. I became an assistant prosecutor. I ran for the territorial house. Statehood came in '59. I ran for the House, got elected. When I got there, Bob Dole wasn't there, so I sent him a telegram. Bob, I'm here, where are you?
What did he send back?
He was embarrassed. Well, we're good friends to this day.
Do you remember when Hawaii became a state? Are you able to share with us that special moment since you were involved in that?
It's a day none of us would ever forget, those of us who are around. I was in the Senate then, and the Senate and House were in session because on that day they were voting. And you can hear Jack Burns's voice. He was our first governor. Not our first one, he's the second governor. He was delegate to Congress at that time. And he's announcing, telling us over the telephone, and it's coming over the PA system. And when the necessary vote was cast, we are going to be a state. The whole legislature, House and Senate, without any prompting, rose almost in unison and marched to Kauai Church. Can you imagine? Picture that. Leaving Iolani Palace, walking out to Kauai Church and giving a prayer of thanks. And on the first election, because the law required a referendum, 85% of the people turned out to vote, and almost all of them voted for statehood. And so when I see the turnout being less than 50%, you know, it's tragic.
What do you think has been the most important characteristic or trait or skill that took you to accomplishing in those types of situations?
I believe in setting goals, and if at all possible, realistic goals, because you don't want to be, well, have a good cause and fail, because failure is not one of the options in my life, and I've been successful. And with planning and work, it can be done. If I tell you what my first election cost, congressional election, $10,000. Today, someone running for the school board spends more than that. For the United States Senate, $62,000. That's it.
What was that like for you as, you know, still a young person getting involved with politics in a party that was dominated by Republicans at the time? What were the defining moments for you in that?
I love that. It's a challenge. I told you at the outset, what makes this job one that I like is that I have challenges every day. Every person I meet may be friendly and everything else, but there is some challenge. Now, I can show you my card as to who I've been meeting with, and you will know that all of them have problems. And they're coming to see me because they've tried their best, they couldn't do it, they want my help, and I want to help. And I've always said, there are many ways to skin a cat, more than one.
Of all the times that you've spent as a senator, you know, you've been a part of a lot of history. We had Jeff Watanabe on our show, and he was sharing with us a moment he shared observing you while you looked out of the windows while they were walking with Martin Luther King. Are you able to share a moment that is just a highlight that you experienced?
Well, if you put it that way, there are a lot of highlights. I was so moved with the death of Martin Luther King, but we were in session at that time. I sent my administrative assistant. So I used to watch on television, here he is carrying the flag, the Hawaii flag, and the announcer would say, here come the British. Because they didn't know what the flag of Hawaii was like. But legislatively, when I was a junior member then, but I was selected to be on the Watergate committee, I suddenly found myself receiving hundreds and thousands of letters Fortunately, most were good. But it was understandable. When you looked at the panel, I was the only strange-looking person. And some would say, "My, he speaks English." So that was an exciting time for me. And when they made me chairman of the Iran-Contra, that put me into another area of responsibility, intelligence, and that type of work. I was the first chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. I try to avoid that. I told the leader, I said, "I appreciate this great honor, but the only thing I know about intelligence is James Bond." He says, "That's what we want. Someone who is not influenced at this moment by the FBI or the CIA or military intelligence. You go with an open mind." So I set it up.
Can you tell us what would be your most memorable memory from Washington as of today?
I've had so many. Let me give you one. Keep in mind, my father was born in Japan. He came over as a child of 3. He was declared an enemy alien. Because he married my mother, who was born on Maui, she lost her citizenship. That was a law of 1924. And they were naturalized in 1953, just in time to vote for me, right? And so when I was sworn in, my father came along, and we went to see the president. We were at lunch at that time with the majority leader. I got along very well with Mr. Mansfield. And a telephone call came in, and Mr. Mansfield answered the phone and says, "Dan, the president wants to speak with you." So I picked her up. "Yes, Mr. President." She said, "I hear your father's in town." I said, "Yes, sir." "Why don't you bring him around?" I said, "I'd love to." "When can you do that?" I said, "I'm free now." He said, "Bring him around." So I took my father there, and you know, my father is in absolute awe from the plantation. So he finishes. There's a great line of newspaper people. The press corps, they're always waiting out there outside the White House, you know. All the cameras are there. And I just became a new senator. "Senator, can you tell us anything about your meeting with the president? Did he discuss this issue of home rule and all, you know, civil rights?" I said, "No, this was my father's meeting, not mine." So I said, "You better interview him." To his credit, my father looked at the camera. He says, "I can die now." The newspaper people, press got stunned. "I've just seen the President of the United States. I've seen my son become a United States Senator. I can die now." Boom.
That's amazing, because I bet at that moment you knew he was so proud of you, right? One thing that amazes me is that you're one of the first Japanese senator, correct? And then also being from Hawaii, and Hawaii was proclaimed a new state. And for some reason, people from Hawaii have this inferiority complex. And you know, you said you always saw people on equal ground. You treated them that way, you acted that way. But inside, did you ever have this feeling like you had to prove yourself because others are curious about you and they don't really know where you stand?
Oh, yes. When we were declared by the government of the United States to be enemy alien, I said the only way we can overcome this is not to give speeches. Who's going to listen to you? So we figured we had to put on the uniform and, if necessary, shed blood. We knew it was going to be bloody. In fact, our company commander was deeply moved, and I'm being generous. After being in Mississippi for a month, we trained in Mississippi. We received a letter from the governor of Mississippi, a very nice letter, very friendly letter, and every company commander was required to read this letter to the men. And we all assembled on Saturday morning, lined up in uniform, and our company commander, Captain Ensminger, a graduate of Roosevelt, tall, holy fellow, had his dark glasses on, and he read the letter. He says, "I wish I didn't have to read this letter, but I am directed to read this. The letter said, in essence, dear what have you, welcome to Mississippi. Hope you have a good training here. While you're here, you will be considered white. So we hope you can conduct yourself accordingly. As a result, we had to sit in the front of the bus, not in the last 3 rows. We could not drink from a fountain that said colored only. The other thing that really stunned me, I've been a life member of the YMCA. And so one of the first things I did when I was let out into the city was to go to the Y and do some swimming. The YMCA always has a pool. And when I got through and I dressed myself, I went up to the manager and I said, thank you very much. I said, by the way, I don't see any black folks here. He looked at me and said, are you a troublemaker? I said, no, I'm just asking. I don't see anyone here. This is only for white folks. Oh my Lord, this is the Young Men's Christian Association. I wrote a hot letter to the New Orleans YMCA. I said, what kind of organization are we running here? And so he wrote back a nice letter. We've got our work cut out for us.
So being all that you've experienced so far, what were some important lessons that you wanted to take from your life to teach your son?
Well, one thing I learned about equality of men, that we talk about civil rights and human rights, it's an ongoing battle, ongoing mission, and you can't just sit back. And someday we will treat each other for his values, not for what his skin color is or the color of his eyes. But I would be less than honest if I said today we have reached nirvana or paradise, because we're not. We still have discrimination. I won't name the restaurant, but when I came back to Hawaii on my first return, full uniform, captain's bars, 4 rows of ribbons, and a hook on my right. I went to this restaurant because a classmate of mine said, let's have lunch together. I said, certainly. So I met him at this restaurant, and the maitre d' came out and says, what can I do for you? I says, I'm a guest of so-and-so. You must be mistaken. I said, no, this is what he told me. Well, this restaurant is not open to Japanese. I said, what do you mean? It's just for white people. In Honolulu, in 1947, the war was over. 1947 in Oakland, I was going to come home on a ship, my first return to Hawaii, so I wanted to look presentable, so I get myself a haircut. So I went to a barber shop. 4 chairs were open. I walked in. Guy looked at me. He said, are you Japanese? I said, I'm an American, but my folks were born in Japan. We don't cut Jap hair. The war was over. Well, it's not as bad today, but it's still around. Here you may have some reverse discrimination. You have some Japanese people who feel hachi-tachi and look down at others. And Asians, during my generation, within the Japanese, you had class systems, right? Within the Koreans, you had class systems. Chinese, the same thing. Filipinos also. If you had some Spanish blood, you were a little higher than the rest. It takes a little while to get rid of these things, but I always say nothing is impossible. It is possible.
Those experiences that you went through, did it change your perspective on things?
Oh yes, because when I left Hawaii, I had met only one African American. And naturally, we were friendly. He repaired bed springs. But all of a sudden, you're surrounded. It's a different story. When the ship we were on from Hawaii was a Lurleen, you would think that our departure from Honolulu in April of 1943 was a glorious event with marching band and marching in step. Well, we were in Schofield Barracks. We were put on cane trains. You know what cane trains are? Open trains where you pile up the sugar cane. We stood up in there. All of us had our duffel bag, no rifles yet. We got to the Oahu Railway Station, that's Ala Park, and we thought we were going to be put on trucks. This movement was supposed to be secret, but the street along the waterfront was just packed with people on the Malka side. Just packed with hundreds of people, parents. Somehow the word spread that the men were leaving. So here we are. We've never been on a parade, we've never marched, and we're carrying these heavy duffel bags, going from the Oahu Railway Station, ragtag, going to Pier 7, looking like a bunch of prisoners of war. You know, nothing glorious. And then to have military police on the side, and ever so often you would hear voices all along the line, Toshio, John, you know, some mother or father trying to get the attention of the son. And ever so often someone would run across a mother or father, and the police would go up and grab them and get back. Now, that scene for parents who lost sons must be a terrible memory. That's the last time they ever saw them, right? That's what's the departure. So we get to Oakland, we get off the boat, we get on trains. The windows are blacked out. When we're going through towns, they're up. When we're out in the open, you know, the beautiful scenery is down, so you can look outside and the grand majesty of America. We always stop at night to go out and stretch our legs. Understandably, because they're afraid that if we stopped off during the day and people saw us, they would think that we're prisoners of war, right? And then the guesswork came around, where are we headed for? Then somebody with some credibility said, we're going to Mississippi for training. And the first thing that came to our mind was, Mississippi, that's where they lynch people, you know? But yet, when we landed in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, there were a whole group of white women waiting to serve us coffee and donuts. Our first greeting in the United States, in Mississippi, was by white women. And thereafter, USO, you don't have Japanese girls, they're all white girls. The first dance I had in Mississippi was with a white girl. And that's the first time I ever danced with a white girl. McKinley High School, you know, you don't find too many white girls. And after a while, the folks in Mississippi began opening up their homes, their ranches and farms, inviting us over for a day. So you kind of figure out now, this must be something wrong, you know, with the water spigot saying black only, white, you know, the restaurants for colored only, white only. And yet the people are very nice. So I say, someday it'll be cleared up.
I wanted to take you back. You mentioned McKinley High School. Are you able to think even further back than that and think about your most fondest childhood memory that you had in Hawaii?
Oh, I got dozens of them. I decided to please my grandfather. You know, my grandfather was the head of the clan, the eldest son. I never went to a barber. He cut my hair. I said I wanted like him. Cut it all off, shaved it. It was a proud day for him, you know. Then there were other great moments like that. When at kindergarten, they made me the first king. We three kings of Orient are. That's when I began to love the stage. But in the first grade, we had a program on nutrition. I didn't realize what nutrition, I didn't know the word nutrition. But we had a play that involved vegetables and things like that. I wore a brown burlap bag, 2 holes for my arms, 1 hole for my head, and I stood in front of the crowd. My first speaking role, I am a potato. I'm good for the health.
Well, I guess you graduated up because you did play yourself in Karate Kid in the movie, correct? You graduated because you moved up to playing yourself in the movie Karate Kid.
Yeah, I did. I gave a little speech there. You remember that?
I read on it.
I didn't take any money for that, but I'm a member of the Actors Guild. I had to sign. And the 442 receives a few bucks ever so often when they show the movie on TV.
If there's one message that you can give our audience out there today, what would that one message be?
You think you've got problems, think of others. You'll find that you're the lucky one, and never give up. Always look to tomorrow. If you want tomorrow to be a better day, it will be a better day. But too many people are unfortunately depressed, so they look forward to a worse day. I had a good youth. I had no idea that I was poor. We lived in a one-bedroom house with 4 kids, and I thought we were very wealthy. We had chickens on the side, gave us eggs, and when the chickens didn't do too well and we had only 1 egg, my mother used to read the Reader's Digest, and the Reader's Digest said, you should have an egg a day. So all of us had to have eggs every day. But whenever there was only one like that, my mother and I had the ends. That's the way it was all the time. We got the ends. My father, my sister, and 2 brothers got the inside with the yolk. And in those days, you won't remember this because you don't know about this. Milk came in bottles. The top 3 inches or so, cream. So you would shake it, right, to mix it up. But my mother would give my father cream, sister cream, 2 brothers cream. When it came to us, skim. I take a physical every 6 months. And about 10 years ago, the doctor said, something must be wrong with you. Your father had massive heart attacks. Your mother had a leaky valve. Your sister has something wrong. My 2 brothers have had bypasses. And your blood pressure is 130/70, cholesterol 166. So they give me physical after physical. Finally, they questioned me, and I told them about the egg and the milk. They said, that's it. My mother, by asking me to sacrifice, didn't realize that I was getting the better deal. See? Oftentimes, it turns out that way.
You've had, I'm sure, so many successes in your life, but what do you feel the most proud of? What is your greatest life accomplishment?
Well, in 47, I'm sorry, I met a young lady. Actually, she was 2 months older than me. And I thought, she's what I've been looking for. So I called her and asked for a date. And it just happened that this was Thanksgiving time, so the men, the officers of the regiment, had a Thanksgiving party, and I took her there. And we ate, danced, and I took her home. 3 days later, I called her. I says, can we have dinner, just the 2 of us? Love to. Now here she is. She's an instructor at the University of Hawaii. She's got a graduate degree, went to Columbia, and here I am coming back from the war. All I've done is 1 semester of college, and I'm going back to college. And on my second date, I'm at the Kewalu Inn. It's no longer there. Ward Estate is there now. And after dinner, I said, will you marry me? And to my surprise, she says, I'd be pleased and honored to. Now, she had been courted by 5 MDs, you know, the Japanese family. She was prepared. Education, learn how to dance, play a musical instrument, cook, and flower arrangement, and all that business. And here comes this bum, you know? And she said, yes. I didn't know what to say. So I said, let's go home. I took her home. I went back to my house. My mother looked at me. She says, what happened? Did you people fight? I said, no, I would never fight a woman. What happened? I said, well, I proposed. She said, oh, no. And what did she say? She said, yes, she'd love to. Boom, she fainted. So I woke her up, and she looked at me, she says, "Did you say that she is going to marry you?" I said, "Yes." And true to form, the next words were, "We'll have to take her to church this Sunday." That's my greatest accomplishment.
What would you consider your greatest challenge, and how did you overcome that?
I've had many challenges, but legislatively, I have challenges ahead of me. One, I want to make certain that Native Hawaiians are given their day in court, because historically, the way we treated Hawaiians were not the way Americans should treat others. So legislatively, I hope to do something about it. See, before my mother went to Susanna Wesley Home, she spent a year with a Hawaiian family. My mother spoke Hawaiian. She always felt that she was somehow obligated to them, that she owed a lot to them. So she always told me, "I can't thank them enough, but you can do it for me."
Thanks for sharing these stories with us.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.